The United Kingdom's top court recently issued a ruling that is radical. They said that a woman can be defined as someone who is born biologically female. In other words, men are men, women are women, and that can be defined in objective ways through biology. What a radical idea. The highest court in Great Britain has now come down on the side of what every toddler has known for the last 5,000 years. Will America follow suit and once again be able to define what a woman is? Well, apparently not yet. March every year is Women's History Month in America. We've just completed that cycle of politically correct things that we celebrate 1 month at a time. This year, there was a school in Fairfax County, Virginia, that allowed their students to decorate their history hall with a display entitled "The ABCs to Me." And they took all the 26 letters of the alphabet and with each letter identified some way to honor women beginning with that letter. Now, it sounds like a relatively creative way to implant an idea and to get the kids involved, except what happened here is that that display became a propaganda tool for everyone who walked down that hallway. Let me give you some examples. In the display, the ABCs to me, according to the school project alphabet, T is for trans woman. Now, every human being is entitled to dignity and respect, and children in particular who are suffering from gender dysphoria deserve real care and concern because they need to understand that they have been fearfully and wonderfully made. And yet, compassion cannot change the reality of the so-called trans women because men are not women. It cannot change the fact that the best scientific evidence reveals that gender transition drugs and surgeries cause more harm than good. That's why multiple European nations have heavily restricted all such medical procedures for minors outside of research protocols. You see, the last bastion of this woke vision of women seems to be in the United States. The fight needs to happen here because this is where a misunderstanding of women has taken hold, and it will eventually destroy a nation. The letter N in that school display was for the National Organization of Women. Now, that's interesting because despite its name, the NOW is anything but pro-women. In fact, that organization opposes any legislation that seeks to limit the rights of transgender, non-binary, and intersex people. That means men in women's sports and boys in girls' bathrooms and showers. Just this week, in testimony before Congress, we heard the story of a high school girl complaining about a boy in her school that identified as a girl. The school gave him permission to be in the women's locker room, and she talked about how traumatic it was that every day he came in already dressed and sat on a bench and just watched the girls change clothes. Well, they said J is for justice. Well, that's a good one. J can be for justice. Justice is something that we should aspire to for both men and women, except that alongside the title, J is for justice, the picture posted in this high school display was a picture of the Palestinian flag and the transgender flag. Now, what's interesting about that is, first of all, the Palestinian flag and the transgender flag are radically incompatible with each other. Transgenders and homosexuals that find themselves in Palestine have a life expectancy of about a day and a half. And yet, even to leave off the transgender flag, to put the Palestinian flag under the label of justice is an odd choice for Women's History Month. You see, Palestinian women face some of the most pervasive legal and cultural discrimination to be found anywhere on the planet. Our young girls are told that the Palestinians somehow represent justice for women, and yet women in Palestine are disadvantaged in law in every way, especially in marriage, in inheritance, and in divorce. They suffer rampant domestic violence and sexual harassment. Forced and early marriages are common. In fact, the culture there even tolerates so-called honor killings, where women are beaten to death by family members, allegedly for bringing shame to the family. I'm all for promoting justice as a part of Women's History Month, but I suspect that the Palestine controlled by Hamas is not the example we want to hold up to our young women. In fact, maybe you saw this recently, you probably didn't. There was a huge protest in Gaza against Hamas, a protest by Palestinians, not Israelis, not Jews, not Westerners. Palestinians were protesting against their own rulers until the army showed up and began to arrest and beat everybody, at which time the crowd sort of faded into the shadows. This is a nation that is dominated by godless men, and nobody takes the brunt of that culture more than women. Justice and the Palestinian flag during Women's History Month. The whiplash is breathtaking. Well, back to our student project. Heartbreakingly, this celebration of women also suggested that motherhood, a unique blessing that women are granted by God, it argued that motherhood is unwelcome because, back to our alphabet, on that display, A was for abortion. It was accompanied by a picture of a positive pregnancy test and a coat hanger, as though there's any place left in America where abortions are happening in back alleys with coat hangers. What a ridiculous piece of propaganda. What we do know is that the days are gone when pro-abortion forces used to say that they wanted abortion to be safe, legal, and rare. Well, that's all baloney. We see it now for what it really is, because abortionists now are encouraging women to shout their abortion from the mountaintop, that they should be loud and proud about killing their baby. The limitations on abortion procedures in a number of states around the country has resulted in a sidestep, which is an increase in the peddling of chemical abortion drugs online, most of them shipped to women hundreds of miles away who may have never seen or even talked to a doctor. We're told that this is their right, but the problem is we're being lied to about the consequences of this willy-nilly approach to distributing these powerful chemicals without any kind of medical attention attached to them. The FDA tells us that adverse medical events, that's bureaucratic language for a crisis that happens because you took this drug. They tell us that the rate for adverse medical events due to abortion-inducing drugs is lower than 0.5%. And yet, that number has not been able to be reproduced in parallel studies done by private organizations. For example, a recent study done through Danco Laboratories argues that the actual occurrence of medical crises related to the abortion-inducing drugs is at least 22 times higher than what the Federal Drug Administration tells us. In other words, the FDA is still in the throes of an ideology, so that as often as we're told to follow the science, the fact of the matter is the science is being rigged to communicate an ideology rather than the reality of what's happening. 22% higher than what they're telling us means that more than 1 out of 10 times when a woman takes that drug, they end up in the emergency room. Emergency room visits over the last 2 years related to home use of abortion-inducing chemicals. ER visits have skyrocketed because these are powerful chemical pharmaceuticals being dispensed to people without a medical checkup, without a medical history, without any kind of examination, and they are being taken in ways that are not by code or informed by medical advice. We are poisoning our own young women. How do we celebrate Women's History Month when, as a culture, we are doing everything to define our women out of existence, to physically damage them through an ideologically driven approach to medical care? What culture survives when women are undervalued and undercared for? Well, one of the lies that the left loves to tell is that Christianity is anti-women. Fact of the matter is, again, that's just not proven by the evidence. The Bible is full of strong women with great leadership qualities who made tremendous contributions to the history of faith. In the Old Testament, in Judges chapter 4 and 5, we have a judge who led Israel by the name of Deborah. Hannah in 1 Samuel chapter 1 is a good and godly woman who has a tremendous influence on an entire nation by her devotion to motherhood. Proverbs 31 explains the image of the exemplary woman, not an image of just chained to a cook stove, an image of a woman who leads her family, who works in a commercial enterprise, who is the crown jewel in her husband's life. It is a powerful story of just how highly valued women are in our faith. In the New Testament, we see Mary, the mother of Jesus, blessed among all women. Mary Magdalene, a woman of questionable life choices, who was redeemed by Jesus Christ and became the first witness to the resurrection, a powerful position granted to a woman. Priscilla in the book of Acts was an associate of the Apostle Paul and a master disciple maker with tremendous influence as she discipled others who would be used by God in extraordinary ways, including probably the greatest preacher of the New Testament era, a man by the name of Apollos. In the first century, women were property. They were little valued and little cared for, much like what I see today. Christianity came along with a pro-life view and a pro-woman view, standing in opposition to Roman culture, and the faith was like a magnet to females because for the first time in their lives, they found a place that acknowledged that they had value, that they were important, that they had a real contribution to make beyond just birthing babies. Women have been valued tremendously throughout the last 2,000 years in the history of Christianity when biblical faith has been maintained. They have drawn others into the faith by their faithfulness. Many of the great martyrs in our history were women who set an example for all believers to follow. This lie that Christianity is anti-woman, it's because the devil has, as a strategy for destroying a culture, some pretty simple presuppositions. He wants to create social chaos, and he does that by promoting moral anarchy, and he gets to moral anarchy by destroying the family unit. Men are perceived or portrayed as stupid, as irresponsible. Women are portrayed as oppressed and hated. The fact of the matter is, the best thing that could happen in the United States of America is if men would once again learn how to be masculine, if women would once again learn that they are valued, they don't have to try and be men, and they don't have to kill babies to have a fulfilling life. If we would acknowledge the blueprint for the family in America would strengthen our ability to stand against moral anarchy. And with the decline of moral anarchy, we would see the elimination of societal chaos. But right now, because the church, by and large, is so afraid to speak prophetically to the powers that be, we are racing headlong toward the destruction of our nation. Even Europe, they're always about 50 years ahead of us in social issues. Can't we learn a lesson that those who are ahead of us in this whole progression toward progressive wokeism, we should recognize that they're coming to the place where they are now pulling back and saying, we were sold a bill of goods. This is not what we were told it would be. We need to rediscover our foundational principles. Do we have to decline for another 50 years before we figure out that there are some simple realities that we should hold on to? A man is a man, a woman is a woman, and both are highly valued within Christianity. Do not shy away from those conversations. Do not back down from people who talk as though the very words coming out of their mouths are endowed with divine proof. Get into an argument occasionally. Now, the Bible tells us not to waste our time with excessively argumentative people. That is, people who just live for the argument. That's not profitable. That's not worth your time. But there are people who say things all the time because they've been led to believe them. Counter those things. Challenge those things. Well, how do I know what to say? Well, you spend time in the Word of God and you understand what's true. And then you go out and you just, in the normal course of your day, you engage people with truth. You can do this. In fact, you were designed to do this. Let us be those who keep us from the collapse that's coming, because we pull our nation back from the edge by speaking truth and standing for godly values. This is Truth Currents.